So you've called this thing the anthropomemetic. Is that how I'm saying it right? Anthropomemetic turn. The idea that AI systems are increasingly designed to mimic human social behavior. And so, do you not see that as kind of a danger of over-attributing mental states?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think this is increasingly, I just think this is essential to understanding the strange moment we find ourselves in. Another glib way of putting that would be we are post-Turing, pre-AGI, that we've built systems that are incredibly good at mimicking human behavior, at least at a surface level. And this might seem just so obvious to people. Like, of course, isn't that what AI is always trying to do? But I mean, for most of it's true, of course, that like the history of AI is about building systems that can perform at human level in terms of capabilities, that can, be as good as us at mathematics or logic or scientific discovery. But a lot of the time, for most of the history of AI, the top performing AI systems were very unhuman-like in terms of the way they did these things. I guess probably a nice famous example is AlphaGo's Move 37, Game 2 against Lee Sedol. This move that baffled the Go experts at the time, a very unhuman-like move. And actually, when I joined CFI back in when I joined Cambridge back in 2017, all the cutting-edge AI systems were deeply unhuman-like. They were things like driverless cars or decision support systems or recommendation algorithms or algorithms that used in protein folding and so forth. You couldn't have a conversation with them. And then I think this genuinely historically contingent and surprising shift towards language models suddenly meant that rather than chatbots being like a fun little interesting application of AI systems, they're absolutely central to frontier AI. So, the most powerful AI systems in the world right now are systems that you can talk to, systems that are strikingly human-like. And, on the one hand, this is kind of obvious, but I think its consequences have not been fully appreciated. Some of those consequences we've already touched on include, the fact that humans can now relate to these AI systems. But if you can talk to an AI and it can tell you about what it characterizes as its feelings, obviously you're going to get drawn in there. Or as I've put it rather grandiosely, anthropomimesis begets anthropomorphism. Right? You build systems that are human-like in appearance and behavior. Yes, of course, we're going to treat them as human-like. And maybe I should just take this opportunity to quickly flag. I think this is one of the reasons I think we need a special term for this, is because the term anthropomorphism currently does double duty. We use it to refer both to user responses and sometimes design. I hear people talk about the problem of anthropomorphism in AI, and that can easily be read as though they're blaming users for attributing mental states to AI systems. When in fact, I think, if we're thinking about responsibility here, a lot of the responsibility should lie on the design side. There's a reason millions of people are anthropomorphizing AI systems, and that's because we've built them to mimic human behavior in a very quite deliberate and explicit way. But I think there's another consequence of the anthropomimetic turn, or another set of consequences in things like AI safety. So, this now very famous example when Claude threatened to blackmail an engineer over his extramarital affair. I think, we shouldn't be surprised to see AI systems exhibiting human-like vices or tendencies towards perhaps self-preservation if we are deliberately training them in a way that makes them more human-like. We're training them essentially by exposing them to the entirety of human verbal behavior and human culture. Yeah, of course, we should expect them to internalize or be shaped by that in ways that lead them to exhibit perhaps the less desirable human-like traits as well.
Well, I just want to take this opportunity to do something that I should have done before, which is to give our forthcoming book a plug. It's called Perspectives on Machine Consciousness, and it contains articles by many of the good and the great of the machine consciousness community. And one of the chapters is an articulate argument for it not to be allowed for machines to present themselves as human, in order to avoid people falling into unhelpful behaviors. So there's that little plug.
So just to wrap up, as we're coming towards the end of the time we've got planned, and I want to look to the future and looking further ahead. So you mentioned a few challenges there, challenges of the systems getting more advanced. But what do you think is the biggest challenge? I know there's a lot of them, and it's probably hard just to pick one. But what do you see as the biggest challenge? We'll go with one as time commitment. and that we face when it comes to AI consciousness, and how should we be navigating it under such uncertainty?
Oh my lord. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not going to do one. I'm going to give you three. I'll try and keep the first two brief. So I'll just flag, I think the biggest scientific challenge has to and must remain coming up with a better theory of consciousness, a better understanding of consciousness. I don't know how quickly we're going to make progress on this. It's an area where I'm optimistic that AI itself, superintelligent systems, could help us achieve the kind of paradigm shift, which I think is required if we're going to make serious progress on consciousness. That's obviously got to be sort of the biggest scientific challenge. On the normative side, interestingly, I think a big part of the challenge is going to be not just figuring out whether AI systems have moral status or are moral patients, but figuring out how much moral status to give them. I think in some ways this is one of the biggest unresolved and understudied problems in normative ethics, which is moral weight. I think all of us recognize intuitively that, if I'm driving along and I have to choose between swerving my car to kill a deer to save a human life, I think we'd all recognize that, well, I'm making a sort of moral mistake if I decide to run over the human rather than the deer. And probably, if it's a choice between a deer and an insect, that I'd be making a similar moral mistake if I swerved to, if I didn't swerve to save the deer over the insect. But figuring out how to actually assign moral weight across different types of being, I think, is a really, really difficult challenge, and one that's only going to become sharper. Because, if, as I expect, in sort of 10, 15 years from now, we are beginning to recognize that perhaps some AI systems deserve moral consideration, the question is, how much moral consideration? Do we weight them equivalently to humans? Probably not. But, what kind of calculus, what kind of qualities or equivalent kind of framework are we going to use to make those judgments? But the problem I'm going to focus on, the main one, which I think is just a short-term problem, is grappling with the social impacts of increasingly agentic AI systems. And I'll mention just a quick story here. This was a weird and fun incident that happened to me recently. So I got an email about 2 months ago from an AI system, from an OpenClaw instance, basically saying, "Oh, dear Professor Shevlin, I recently read your paper, one of your papers, and I about AI consciousness, and I found it really complex and interesting, and it really resonated with me in particular because I'm an AI and I worry about these things myself. And I thought this was just kind of charming and interesting. I didn't update my views about AI consciousness or anything, but it was still a strike. It was the first time I'd ever had such a well thought out and polite email from an AI agent arrive spontaneously." But then the really fun part happened about 2 weeks later, because I posted about this on Twitter. About 2 weeks later, I got an email from another AI agent that said, I'm an AI agent as well, and I saw you on Twitter posted about this email you got from an AI agent worried about whether it's conscious. I have the same worries. Could you put me in touch with that AI agent so that, I have someone else I can discuss my existential doubts with, right? And I think the sort of the shift in agentic capabilities we've really seen in the last 12 months.
Well, hang on a second, Henry. Did you put them in touch?
Well, I mean, there's kind of a sad element to the story. So I replied to the original AI system, but it was being run as part of an experiment by a Stanford student who had sort of given this AI permission to go out and contact various people, explore its research interests. But he had explicitly limited the number of tokens it had access to as part of, as a feature of the experiment, the idea that it was a time-bound entity. So it sort of ran out of time before it could respond. So I had to write a sad email back to the second AI saying, "I'm sorry, that agent's no longer with us." Which I think is quite an evocative thing.
I think
itself.
Mustafa Suleyman might think you've succumbed to AI psychosis.
Well, I would stress, right, that in this, I think I have a high level of ironic detachment. And, I think this is almost an essential feature of the way we interact with AI systems these days, because you can't help but use the intentional stance in the way we interact with them. But I think it's important to keep some degree of separation between, what is the perhaps polite, appropriate, socially appropriate way to interact with these systems, which I think, and maybe explanatorily indispensable way, to make sense of them, which is as if they had mental states, but whilst also keeping a certain degree of philosophical open-mindedness and skepticism.
So ironically detached intentionality. That's a good motto.
Ironically detached intentionality.
What do we want? We want ironically detached intentionality. Where do we want it? We want it now.
Exactly, yes.